join us. So I leave it up to you if you want.
At 3:01 p.m. on 4/20/21, and if we could get a roll call of each individual here. I'm going to ask that each person just identify themselves. And do we have to identify geographically where we're coming from in these meetings? No? Okay.
No, you do not, because you're not claiming medical emergencies. It's virtual for everybody because of the declaration.
Because under the governor's orders for us, we have no option. We must meet in person effective tonight.
I'll start with the roll call then. Chair Steve Gottlieb.
Present.
Vice Chair Rosemary Kornacki.
Present.
Carolina Noguez Ortiz.
Present.
Rami Swiden, I don't think is on yet. Joe Vassallo.
Present.
We have a quorum.
I guess that means we can move forward. And do we need to read the resolution to conduct the meeting?
No, you don't need to this time. It's slightly modified from the last time, and it's contingent. It's based on the City Council's declaration on April 12th that there is an emergency that requires virtual meetings.
Okay. I believe we would then, if this is me telling everybody what's on the pre-printed agenda here, we have election of officers.
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, you do need to actually, though, have somebody move the resolution and then second and vote on it. I'm sorry for the.
Make a motion to conduct an electronic meeting.
Moved by Joe, seconded by Carolina, I believe.
Yes.
All those in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. How's that, Lori?
That's fine. Thank you very much. Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. Now we're going to move to election of officers. So we'll need a chair, a vice chair, and secretary treasurer. So
Are the two of you willing to continue on? I'd like to make a motion to do that if you are.
Certainly, yes.
As vice chair, sure, I accept.
May I make a motion that we re-elect Chairman Steve Gottlieb and Vice Chair Rosemary Kornacki as the chair and the vice chair?
Seconded.
And just a friendly amendment, you could also perhaps nominate Glenn Lapin as the secretary treasurer and add that to your motion if that was amenable to you.
I'd like to amend that. Thank you. And add Glenn for secretary and treasurer.
All right. Moved by Joe, myself as chair, Rosemary as vice, and Glenn Lapin as secretary. All those in favor, or wait a second, sorry. Any discussion? If there's no discussion, we'll take a vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. So we have a chair, a vice chair, and a secretary treasurer. We need to get an approval of the minutes from the October 20th, 2020 meeting.
I make a motion to approve the minutes for the 2020 meeting, October 20th, 2020 meeting.
Thank you, Joe. And seconded by
I'll second it.
Carolina. Thank you. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Let's see. We want to go to old business. Update on previously approved projects, Harrison Poolside, Troy, and Uptown Apartments, Somerset Plaza, Regency at Troy. And I'm guessing that Mr. Lapin, you're on.
Be happy to give you an update on those projects. So just had a meeting actually last week on the Harrison Poolside Troy project. That project has been delayed, and it is because that the construction costs have increased significantly for not just that project, but all projects during this time. So the developer has decided that he wants to look at ways of reducing costs, yet still coming through with a quality project. So they are going to resubmit to the planning department initially to make sure there's approval from the planning department, a redesign of the project. Originally, the project entailed about 114 residential units, and this is next door to the Michigan Design Center on Stutt Street, as you recall. And it's going to be reduced to around 72 units. But the design, I think, will be very, very nice. Initial reactions from planning department are very positive. It is something that we have not seen in Troy before. It is very similar to the other projects that the developer has done in Royal Oak on Harrison Street, which is actually the name of this project. But many of these projects have been hurting because of COVID in the past year and the increase in construction costs. Other projects, Uptown Apartments is open. They're opening units right now. It looks great. Initial reactions have been very positive. They are not totally open yet, but just the first couple buildings, and they're going to continue on from there. This is phase one. Eventually, phase two will come in after that, once behind them, which is where FedEx currently is. So that was a big part of the Brownfield angle on this. There's underground storage tanks in the area behind this site over at FedEx. So that will be coming out, and this project will expand from there. So very positive. I mean, initial reactions, it looks great from the road, creates some more density in that area behind MJR Theaters. You're seeing a little more people walking back and forth around there. So very positive project. So looking forward to that fully opening in the next few weeks. Joe?
Question. It does. It looks really good. I go by it frequently. I really like the way they've turned out. Do you know when the FedEx is supposed to move out and the demolition would occur? I can't remember the time frame. Do you recall that?
Yeah, and they've probably been delayed as well. But I'm going to guess they're hoping around the summertime. That's the hope that they'll be out of there. So hopefully soon. But we'll need to double check that and see if they're still on that time frame.
Glenn, isn't that been delayed a number of times, the moving wherever they're going to move to?
Right. Yeah.
That has always moved back. And just to go back to the other development, the other development was on an old landfill, and they were going to have to use like these footing pillars to go down to bedrock. Is that still the case? Because because that seemed very expensive.
Yeah, he's relooking at all of that. He's looking for various options to see if we can lower the cost.
Because that was really expensive. So that you can imagine they would have to drill down to bedrock and then pour a footing to hold the building up. It's much more expensive than typical building techniques.
Carolina, you got a question?
Yeah, so for the Harrison Poolside, have they given a new target date to be finished? I know they need to resubmit the plan.
Yeah, it's probably going to take a full year of construction. It's the anticipation, if not a year and close to a year and a quarter potentially. Again, depending upon weather and a lot of things.
Okay, and they have the name Poolside. Will they still have a pool, or are they kind of axing that?
It's a great question. So their plan is, yes, to still have a pool. And
swimming pool or a pool for reflection pool kind of thing?
No, it'd be a swimming pool.
Okay.
And with like a clubhouse area as well. And be right in front. That's the current design of it. So as far as I know, they're going to keep the name.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Glenn,
On the other project, go ahead, Steve.
yeah. Do you know what the square footage, and has it been a shift from the 114 to 72 units? Does that shift their size of the units?
Yeah, the units will vary in size. They're going to have some 1 bedroom, some 2 bedroom, probably a little smaller than they originally anticipated, but not to the point of being micro units, which you're seeing in some areas, not that small. So they're trying to keep the rents low, as low as they possibly can, but still offer decent space and room within each unit.
And all just apartments?
Correct. Rentals. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the other projects, Somerset Plaza, that's Somerset Shops at the corner of Maple and Coolidge. That is almost now fully occupied with tenants. Aldana's Mexican Grill has opened recently. In fact, they're going to do a formal opening on Cinco de Mayo. And so good reaction so far from people that are coming in there. The plaza looks really good. The tenants are very strong as well. Obviously, probably not the greatest of all times to be opening businesses in the past year, but they are surviving. And actually some of them, such as the Detroit Wing Company, has actually done gangbusters since they've opened their doors. So it all depends on what business niche you're in. If you're in the carry-out business and do that well, you're going to do well during the past year. So Somerset Plaza is now generating revenues, and I'm going to get to that a little further on in the agenda as well when we talk about that with the budget. Regency of Troy, that's the assisted living senior housing complex at Axtell and Maple Road on the old McGregor site. The McGregor building was torn down by the owners, the new owners, but they have not proceeded on construction. They are looking at assisted living and senior housing needs throughout the region because it has changed in the past couple of years. So they are rethinking that project. Have not seen anything in terms of what they are proposing to do. Although their initial proposal was to look at more mixed use, potentially bringing in some retail into the project and kind of minimizing the number of units that might be there. So, but we'll see what they actually come in with in terms of submittals, and no time frame in terms of what we've seen at this point.
Glenn,
So that's
Glenn, this is Mark. This question kind of bleeds a little bit into the budget, but am I right to say that the loan is paid off on MJR, and which this board probably may or may not have been around. It was over a 7-year period, which the BRA loaned money to demolish the old Kmart just north of the apartments we were talking about, and there was a loan. So I believe the loan is paid off now, and so what that does is that there's as large of pool in the revolving loan fund that you potentially could have.
Yeah, we'll get to that in the budget. And I think, Joe, you might have been on when we approved MJR.
I both were, yeah.
Yeah, and Rosemary too. Yeah. I think there's still another year or 2 left on that repayment for the loan. But I know they're getting close. And we'll take a look at that in the budget as well. But I think we're getting real close on payoff. And in terms of how you want a project to work, MJR worked beautifully. It worked for the developer. It worked for the city. We got a project that took a totally dilapidated and vacant, blighted property, totally repurposed it for an exciting use that generates jobs, it generates people, it generates traffic. And really, you could look at that and say, that was probably one of the major catalysts along Maple Road to help spur on development for uptown apartments behind them and some of the other developments that have been going on along there. So very positive development for the city and the developer. I'm not sure being in the movie business is probably the greatest thing right now, but hopefully that will turn around soon as well.
What do you hear
So-
on Kmart?
Yeah.
Any interest in Kmart property?
It's just in the Kmart property? You mean the headquarter property?
Yes.
The owner has been looking at that site. They've had plans for that site, and that was before COVID. So I'm not sure if there's anything new to report on the Kmart site.
And Glenn, Steve, have you heard anything about the former Davis Manufacturing on the corner of Livernois and I want to say Elmwood? Someone mentioned to me they thought that would potentially be a site for us to consider.
Yes, and I've been talking to the owners and this couple of owners over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
My understanding is that it's recently being sold. I'm not sure it's gone through yet, but it's going to be sold really soon. So yeah, they are very aware of the program, and very possible that they may come in. So we need to look to see exactly what they're trying to do over on that site. But
And that has been a subject property that this board has considered in past years as well. So this will not be the first time that it's been presented to this board.
right, and it's an important location as the gateway to the city, basically from the south.
Sure. Right.
So, very
More
important
than
site.
what Lori just said, I think there were even previous brownfield plans prepared for the site.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's the report on kind of the existing projects.
Great. Is there any other questions? And I think we can move on to new business. 2021-22 budget and Troy Brownfield Redevelopment Authority draft guidelines. I hope everybody had opportunity to review the guidelines, I think, that were attached at the end of the agenda. But Glenn, I think, is that your
Yeah, let's talk about the budget first. And so this, we do this every year at this time to approve the budget for the next year and the couple years after that. So you see the budget in front of you, just in terms of general overview, revenues coming in on projects that are existing through the Brownfield Authority. You see TCF Bank, that was done many, many years ago, but is still on the books. And so you can see based on the tax capture that is coming in, you can see what actually came in 2020 and what is projected coming in down the road. Same thing with the other project as well with MJR. And as you can see, MJR starts zeroing out in 2023. So we are getting to the end of that for the revolving loan fund. Joe?
Sorry, can I interrupt, Glenn? So I noticed the TCF is now closed. If that property sells, do they still have to comply with this, or we still will collect the funds? Is that correct?
So the funds are still captured. Lori, I guess the question is whether or not we would still be paying them. Probably not.
So, again, we'll have to look at that. This is one where they were never, ever going to be fully reimbursed based on the minute amount of capture and the amount of time that this has gone on. So we will certainly be looking at that. Generally, we would, it's not necessarily going to be running with the land, so it would be specific to them individually because they are the ones who made the investment in the property.
Thank you.
So you can see for the revenue side, the revenues coming in for the other projects as well. So this will be the first year that the Somerset shops, Maple and Coolidge, have been generating capture. So it says here as 12,250 in terms of the estimate. It actually, with the winter tax, came out to about 13,000, so pretty close to that. So we'll be getting kind of the first check out to them in terms of reimbursement. So that's very positive that they're up, occupied, and generating tax revenue, which is what we want to see. Regency at Troy, if it goes forward, you can kind of see the projections. I'm sure that's going to get bumped back as we proceed in future years, if that does not get built as we originally anticipated. So those numbers we expect to change. Uptown Apartments has not generated any revenues as of yet. We're getting there. We expect in this upcoming budget that they'll be getting their first reimbursement after July 1st of this coming year. Harrison, same thing. Once they get going, you're going to see blank lines there. After they get going and open and start generating revenue, that's when we'll start paying them back in terms of reimbursements. Expenditures, money coming in, money going out, kind of going through each project and general projections as to what we expect to pay each project over the next several years. As you can see, Somerset Shops is really the only new one that is coming in for the current year, actually. And then that'll increase a little bit for next year. The rest of it, the revolving loan fund, kind of gives you the idea of what the balance is. That is being funded through the MJR project. As we get tax capture, that comes back to the revolving loan fund. And then we can use that revolving loan fund balance for other projects in the future. We have been, so we're waiting for that to get back up there in terms of the balance, and it's starting to definitely do that since we pretty close to zeroed that out for the MJR project. But now it's coming back nicely, and we can start looking again at using that, those funds for additional projects that are coming out there. We tried to use a revolving loan fund for, I think, more transformational projects, and really up to the discretion of the committee. But kind of looking at important projects that sort of rise above something that we really want to push forward. That could be a catalyst. MJR, I think, fit that in particular for that project, and I think going down the road, that's kind of how we want to use those funds.
And Mr. Chairman, I just say that there are criteria as well that must be satisfied. So we do have those. We do have specific requirements. Correct.
And the further on the budget, you can then go into each project in detail, kind of see where the capture is, where the original taxable value is, what the projections are going forward, and then where the millage is coming from and what those rates are. So that kind of summarizes the budget, and we would definitely be looking for any questions and also an approval when you are ready.
Are there any questions? If there are no
Move
questions,
approval of the budget.
moved by Joe, seconded by
I'll second it.
Rosemary. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And did we want to cover any additional information about the draft guidelines?
Yes, that's next on the agenda. Yep, happy to talk about that. So what prompted this? The draft guidelines, Mark and I talked about this for some time now, but a couple months back, I got an inquiry from a developer that was asking about brownfield assistance on a property that they're considering locating at. And it's a major property in Troy. And they said, we're kind of looking at this, and we're considering it. We know it fits with the zoning, so there's no problem with that. But, there'll be a lot of, environmental remediation expenses, and we'd like to approach brownfield. And I said, well, great, what kind of, use are you looking at over there? What are you proposing? They said, well, it's in a large site. It's an industrial property, 11 acres, and we want to turn that into a storage facility, a self-storage facility. And I said, okay, well, that fits with the zoning. That's fine. I mean, now, Brownfield Authority has jurisdiction over this, so we're going to certainly look at that closely. I can tell you that self-storage facilities in general, not that we have anything against them personally, they're an important part of the fabric of a community, obviously, but this project would generate one job total. When you look at the revenues coming in over time, they really didn't need any more assistance. Yes, it would clean up the property. Is that the highest and best use for the property? That's another question. So even though we can't say, no, you can't have a storage facility there, we can say, you know what, maybe this is not something the city or the Brownfield Authority would necessarily want to encourage. Now, we would have brought it to you. I said, hey, put together a plan. We're happy to talk to the Brownfield Authority, get their input and feedback on it, and then go from there. But just to let you know in advance, it may not necessarily be something that they nor the city management might be, incentivizing to get done. So made the message clear, to them, sort of waited a little bit. Turned out they did not proceed with the project. And just last Friday, and this site, by the way, is the Goodman site, which is the Versatube site up on Rochester Road, 11 acres, which has been there for years. It has some serious environmental conditions that they need to be faced with it. The property closed just last week to an developer that wants to now put in a mixed-use development, including some robotics, including some retail in front, mixed use, industrial, job creation, job generation. So they called and said, so does this fit with the zoning? Yes. Does this fit, with something with the Brownfield? Would the Brownfield be interested? Absolutely. So this is the kind of project that we want to make sure that we encourage. So having gone through all that, figured I'd go back to these policy guidelines, put some ideas together as to what the Brownfield Authority may want to consider looking at as projects come in. Not every project is a perfect one. Not every project should be incentivized or encouraged by the city. And other projects should be encouraged. So I thought I'd kind of put it down on paper. These are draft only. I put it down for discussion. We do not have to approve this today unless you're totally happy with it. We're able to, but it's out there for discussion. You can noodle on it for weeks on end, whenever you want. But I put it there for feedback, for thoughts. It's what would be helpful to you in terms of moving forward on reviewing future projects. So that's kind of what prompted it. I thought it'd be a good time to present it. And also it kind of goes through kind of what we're looking for in an application too. So kind of some boilerplate type of stuff. So I turn over to you, Mr. Chair, and if you want to sort of lead a discussion on that, happy to discuss it.
Thank you. So does anyone have any questions?
I do. I have one, Steve. They're talking about minimums of eligible brownfield expenses. That's a pretty big number. Are there projects that they can't go forward because maybe they have a smaller field to clean up or not as big of a mess to tidy up?
That's a good point. That's not necessarily a magic number, and certainly absolutely would be open to lowering that number. I can tell you that most of the projects that we see are well over $1 million in terms of environmental cleanup costs. The question starts becoming, if it's less than $250,000, to go through all this, what kind of capture are they actually going to be getting? What's the enhancement on the property? Those kind of considerations start coming up. But there's nearly no magic to the $250,000 number. We could certainly lower that. So yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, if rather than the total brownfield consideration, I'm thinking of with the oil and all the pollutants and chemicals that we've dumped. If it's just tires, trash, is that part of the brownfield consideration as well? If it's just junk, trash, without being severe chemical contaminants.
Yeah, it does not have to be severe. It can just be blighted, trashed, some mild asbestos or whatever it might be. But anything that would help bring the property up to a productive economic use so that it does create some additional tax revenues and capture where the brownfield could come into play. Absolutely. So that's kind of where the 250 number came from, is that when it gets below that, it's hard to say that there may be that many projects that would be able to do that. Not to say that's impossible, but it's certainly possible.
Okay, thank you.
Also, Glenn, isn't economic obsolescence one of those categories?
Yes.
Okay.
And the 250 again would be a guideline if there was a project that you thought was worthwhile and they only needed 225 or 200. I would assume that you'd be, willing to bring it to us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, these are guidelines. These are not rules.
Yep.
And again, if you feel more comfortable in lowering that, happy to do that. That's fine.
Well, I think based upon some of the discussion, we really do want this to be for projects that are of a substantial nature and that will be helping to transform a site. And when you think about it, the 250 is actually fairly low threshold when you think about how easily you can get to that number with cleanup or demolition or whatever. It's pretty easy to get there quickly.
Yeah, it does not take much to get that number up there.
Any other questions?
And I do like leaving some of the openings as far as some of the smaller, if you've got some retail that's part of a larger development, I think that makes sense. And some of the other things that you've added in here, I liked a lot also. And then trying to encourage, though, the higher density and the mixed use and those things.
I should point out that some of this may not necessarily be allowed by law anyways. Like gambling casinos just can't open up. But it's on there just for, sort of comparison purposes. And, so there are other laws that would come into play potentially before we even get to look at a brownfield. But.
Actually, I did have a question about that, Glenn. The list that is included in this had some suggestions, pluses, these are applicable, and some that are this would not be a recommendation. Did that come from enabling legislation, or did that come from, where did that come from? Like, is that something that was created by city council, or where is the genesis of the have and have not use list?
So the use here, this list specifically, yes. So there's state enabling legislation, but they do not prescribe exactly the kinds of uses that should be going in. Each community, I think, for how their brownfield, how they want to treat their brownfields, can sort of determine how they best want to use limited resources that they may have on the projects that are the highest and best use, for instance. So it's kind of a prioritization. This list did not necessarily come from anything other than me talking internally to some folks at the planning department and others as to the kind of things we may want to encourage and also the kinds of things that may not necessarily need our help. Not that we're saying that, certainly if the law allows, a certain facility or a certain use, it does not necessarily mean that we have to support it because it's possible that that particular use is generating a significant amount of revenue, may not necessarily need our support. So that's why some of these are on here. The idea too is, I'm not sure we wanted to get into a situation of where individual retail, like small retail sites, maybe a half acre kind of thing. If it's part of a larger mixed use, I think, it makes a lot of sense. But I'm not sure how specific we want to get as to individual small parcels, whether or not that has the highest and best value or use in terms of brownfield. Again, that's up for debate. If a McDonald's comes in and says they want to take over a property that was formerly derelict, should we be there to help them out? I don't know. I mean, again, looking at the kinds of projects and the, you know, the abilities that we have, if we want to, you know, look at projects that have, you know, the most significant impact, you know, I would say we, you know, maybe we need to focus more on those mixed use projects and ones that, you know, not just individual smaller parcels. So again, it goes towards impact.
Yeah, I just want to add that I think the guidelines are really great because it reflects a lot of what we heard, you know, from residents in terms of like the material usage that, you know, we want something that looks good, that fits with the city, and really encouraging high density. And like you said, you know, the Brownfield program is really cool, is really unique. And so, you know, I think maybe when we look at projects, we should be also looking for unique projects that fit a lot of these things.
And you know, going back to your example, Glenn, there may be a reason why there is a specific site that really the city would like to see redeveloped. And even though the use is a McDonald's or something like that, it may be something we want to entertain because it does create, you know, 50 jobs or some other reason. And so again, as a guideline, I think these are good guidelines, but it doesn't prohibit the opportunity to still bring something forward.
Which is why I put in that last paragraph.
And if I may, this is also, I mean, this is a guide for the developer as well, because they're not going to waste their time and money, because it does take a lot of time and money to go forward with a plan. And if they know that it's not likely to be ultimately approved or it's not on the favored list, then they can make that decision whether or not it's worth the investment.
Yeah, and I appreciate the fact that you put that together because it does make a lot of sense to provide something. I did have a little bit of a concern with some of the items. You mentioned some of the legalities, and I noticed today I got a copy of a letter that Governor Whitmer had sent to, well, the letter came to me in a different capacity, but where she was signing along with a bunch of different governors looking to get federal approval for cannabis banking. And I know from a city standpoint, you know, we've identified caps and limitations, but I wonder if that if the law changes at a federal level, do we want to have something like that in our guidelines? So I guess that is more a question for Lori than anybody else. You know, should we leave something like that in our guidelines, or might it be something that we would be concerned about being in violation of a federal law? That would be my only concern.
So if federal law does change, you obviously have the ability to amend these guidelines at any point in time in the future. I'm not worried about having them because right now the marijuana grow is something that is not one of those coveted developments that the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority would be inclined to support. So I don't think that there's a problem the way that it's listed. And, you know, again, I think it's probably good to have it in there because we never know. Legislation does change and it changes frequently. And sometimes it changes quickly. So I think it's good to have these items in here.
Thank you, Lori. And by the way, I wasn't thinking so much of the grow. I was actually thinking more of the TCF site. For example, if a federal institution, a bank came in there and then they were looking for that earlier question I think I mentioned about economic obsolescence, or if they made the claim that they were going to bring jobs in and that they were also if a change in federal law occurred, providing marijuana banking, would we then exclude them based on the fact that they were outside our guidelines? So those were the kinds of things. That's why I was curious about, you know, as a component in a guideline, but I think you addressed it with the fact that we can change it as just a guideline. So that's all. Thank you. That's our guidelines. Did you want, so I guess my take on it is there's a fair amount of information, and rather than have everybody just make a quick, let's approve it, why don't we give everybody till the next meeting to think about, would they like to make any suggestions, modifications, recommendations to it, and they could send those to, maybe send them all to you, Glenn, since I think that, as each individual person has a thought or an idea, and then maybe we could take a vote on that at the next meeting if everybody's amenable to that.
Sure, good idea.
Just a question, Mr. Lapin, do you have any developments you think that will be coming in before the October meeting, which I think is your next meeting, right?
Very possible. So we may have a special meeting between now and then.
And you could also maybe make the suggestion that the guidelines have been presented to the board and that they will be acting on it in the next meeting. So you could still, I guess, use those for discussion points to be helpful if it was.
Like they're pending? Sure.
Right.
Would that be helpful, Glenn?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Great. So,
Lori, this is Mark, Lori. I know there's no exact rule or law about these guidelines, or, you don't, like, we're not required to send it to council, but it might be good to have council in line with this, or if they have other ideas, I don't know, I'm just sort of thinking out loud. Whether or not we could or should share it with council in some way.
could we include that so that, will there be a council meeting prior to, I'm certain there will be, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe we could just ask that it be also submitted to council for their input. Is that everybody agree with that, or Laura?
Yeah, I don't know that you need input. Certainly you can transmit it to city council and that could be done as a report and communication. But I want to make sure that I'm preserving the autonomy of this board. So, you know, it's you guys have the authority to approve the Brownfield redevelopment plans.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And, you know, you guys need to decide, you know, if these guidelines work, you know, based upon your experience with the committee and the kind of projects that we're seeing. And then we would certainly, once you guys are good with it, we would absolutely, you know, have it, you know, go to council in terms of just for their information as part of, you know, a report.
So could I ask you, Lori, if you would include the verbiage to present that to them for to indicate that we wanted it presented to city council and that this is what we intend to vote on at our next meeting? Is that?
I'm sure Mr. Lapin could handle a report or communication as well. And you just want it just as the report to council to let them know that it's going to be voted on by the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority?
Whoever would be appropriate to have that communication go through. That's all. I don't want to make work for somebody whose job is already busy.
I mean, my initial thought was just, you know, rather than taking it to them before you guys deliberate on it, you know, we take it to them sort of after, present it to them. Because again, they're guidelines. So, you know, if there's any major pushback, you can certainly modify it at that point. You guys need to decide, I think, and then we could take it to them afterwards.
After the fact.
That's what I would suggest.
Does everybody agree with that then? We'll just have our,
Yeah, they're not
I do.
rules and guidelines. Sure.
thank you, Glenn.
Frankly, I'm, you know, in support of doing it now based upon I've read it over and gone through it, and through the discussion, I'd be even willing to make a motion, but I don't want to, you know, if people want more time, that's fine too.
Well, maybe we could poll everybody and see, how does everybody else feel about that?
I would like more time. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, you said go ahead?
Oh, I said, I'm ready now.
Okay, and Rosemary?
I would like more time. Doesn't have to be much, but just a little more time.
Okay. So in honoring that consideration, I think I also think maybe if we just let it, people digest it, because I'd like to have just a chance. I did read it and went through it and some of the concerns I brought up, but I did have some other questions that I thought maybe it might be handled offline better. So, but that said, at the very latest, we'll have a vote on it either at our next special meeting or at the regularly scheduled meeting. Is that good with everybody?
That's fine.
Mr. Chair, if I may, just again to give Glenn something so that he has something to give to future developers. Perhaps there could be a motion that directs administration to bring this back to the board at your next meeting.
I'd be willing to bet Joe would probably support or make that motion.
I certainly would. I don't know if we technically need a motion and a voting on that, but if we do, I would like to move that we bring this back to the next meeting for approval or denial at that time.
And the rest of the board, how do you guys feel? Lori, do you feel you need to have a motion, or would you just be satisfied with the way we've presented it this afternoon?
I think if you have a motion that says that you're going to be bringing it back to the next meeting for action, that I think that, again, Glenn, that gives Glenn some ability to say to any potential developers in the meantime, here is this is proposed. So I guess it's a motion. I would recommend that you go through that process.
I'm going to go with moved by Joe and seconded by...
I second that.
Rosemary. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that very circuitously got us to the point everybody was hoping to get to. Is that accurate? All right. Brownfield guidelines, board member comment. Who wants to go first?
None for me. Good meeting.
I just have one comment. Are there open vacancies on this board? I'm just wondering because, today we just barely had quorum. And in the future, just wondering if they needed to be filled or what was going on with that.
I believe
Yes.
it's 5 to 9 members, right?
Any suggested, members would be welcomed by the Troy City Council who, would make those appointments. So if you do have suggestions for persons who would fulfill that role, we would certainly welcome them.
Okay.
Is it
Absolutely.
something that we would, because I was contacted by somebody who's, I think would be a huge benefit because they have some very detailed knowledge of some infrastructure things that going on a much county level. Do we reach out to them, or how should we identify individuals?
I think it's probably most appropriate to if you have a person that you'd like to be approached, it's usually the Mayor Pro Tem, Dr. Teresa Brooks, who would be approaching the individuals initially, unless their names have already been submitted and they've submitted an application. So I would probably forward that information to Dr. Brooks or to Mark or Glenn, either one, and they can follow up on that.
Thank you.
This is Mark. I would just say, though, this is a very unusual board where you have 5 to 9 people. It's a set number.
Yeah. I was surprised to see that variable number in there myself, actually. But okay. All right. Are there any other board member comments?
I have a question for Glenn. The Met site, the old Troy Hilton, and it was the MEP Met Hotel. What is going on there?
That is the same owner as the Sienna Senior Housing Project over at Axtell and Maple.
Okay.
They have been talking to various potential users for the site, but they have not submitted anything in terms of a proposed plan at this stage.
So it's in play then, okay. All right, thank you.
Any other comments?
This is Mark. Glenn, wasn't the owner trying to dump the property though at the Met? They were trying.
Yeah, if he could. The problem is he paid too much money for it and he can't get what he wants out of it.
What's the current zoning on that?
I think it's split. I think there's a part of it might be research, technology kind of thing, if I'm not mistaken. But there's some flexibility there too.
That might go a long way towards having them have some flexibility on use. All right. Any other comments? All right. If there's no other board member comments, I don't think we have any public, do we?
It's correct. There is no public comment that has been submitted either by phone or by email.
All righty. Well, if there are no other comments, then we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your service, and thank you for being here today.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see everybody.
Thank you.
Hopefully I'll see you in
Safe.
person next one.
Hope so.
Yeah, hopefully.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.